In this session, we will be implementing sound. Usually I prefer to leave that at the end of the project, but in this particular case, since we are about to populate our world with those crates that we're going to duplicate and place at dedicated location, and also start dealing with our non-player character that is going to be another robots moving and shooting, and we need to actually start handling the sound at this point in time. We're going to start off by creating a new directory under MicroBots, a new asset group. I'm going to double click on MicroBots and create a new asset group that I'm going to call sound buffers. Create that. Ensure that the library is able to display sound buffer. And I'm going to click on the directory and I'm going to go under asset and import. And back in the MicroBots directory that you have received, you select all the OJJ file and hold shift to do a multiple selection. So we got the blaster when we are shooting and we have ammo, blaster empty when we have no more ammo. Deactivated will be the sound that we use when the robot get hit, and we're going to have a footsteps when the robot is walking. In a heartbeat will be our background music. And then we have item ammo and item health when we are picking up those crates. So we're going to open that up, click on batch import and create. And in a second, all our sound buffers are now imported. We're going to move on with the sound source. So selecting an object here, we are going to simply create a new sound source and create a parent-child relationship. So as we are duplicating those crates later on, we will also create another sound source that will come along with it. So I am going to select my crate here, which is the ammo crate, and I'm going to go under object, add to render layer, and sound source and positional. And I am now going to, with my new sound source selected, I'm going to go under properties and object, and I'm going to rename this one to be sound underscore item ammo. And with my sound source selected, I'm going to hold shift and click on my crate here, and I'm going to go under object and attach to active, so we can see that we have a relationship. So now when my crate is actually moving, my sound source is also moving. I'm going to select my sound source, and also under object properties, I'm going to go under transform and local space, and I'm going to click reset transform to ensure that it is at the center of my crate here. Next, I am going to move on to my sound source properties, and what I want is to connect my item ammo here, drag and drop, and I'm going to change also, since it is a positional sound, I'm going to change the reference distance and the max distance. I'm going to use a value of 0.25 and 100, which should give us a good value to get started. And I'm going to move on to my health crate and repeat the same process. Select my health crate. I'm going to push M this time to put the 3D cursor at the center of my crate. And I'm going to go under object, add to render layer, sound source, and positional. I'm going to select my positional as the active object, hold my shift and select my crate, and object attached to active. And now my sound source move along with my crate. Select back the sound source and go under object properties and call it sound item health this time. And you're going to see that just to display, if I select the crate and I click and I press shift and D to duplicate, as I move my duplicated object, you can see that it not only duplicate the crate itself, but the sound source. And this is exactly why we are actually doing this at this point in time, because we're going to shortly after place those crate in the world. I'm going to select my duplicated crate and press delete to remove it. And now I'm going to proceed with the sound source property for our health crate. I'm going to drag and drop item health in my sound buffer, and I am going to change the reference distance to be 0.25 and 100. And next, I am also going to change the gain in this specific case of my crate, because the sound is a bit low on this one. So I'm going to put the gain for my health crate to be 2, doubling it. Next, we are going to be able to code that as soon as the bot controller collide and pick the item, just play the sound source. So we are going to go under collect items. And this is the part of the code that we're actually picking up the health item and the ammo. So I'm going to give a bit of space here, and I'm going to simply copy and paste this line here, which is very basic. What we are doing, we are using the item and we are grabbing the attachment at index 0. Next, we're going to access the data sound source and we are going to simply play it. I'm going to repeat that for my ammo here. I'm going to hit the build and save. And I am now going to press spacebar to enter my view. And I'm going to push play to increase the application time. And as I move around and pick a crate, I should hear the sound right away. Next, I want to change I'm going to access the sound engine properties here. And I am going to set the gain of our listener, which is our geometry camera, our main camera here. I'm going to set that to 1. And I'm going to go test that with my health. I'm going to move around and select my crate here. And I can hear my health crate get picked up. I am going to restore them back to visible. So crate item and visible. And like that, we are going to be ready to go and simply select them and place them around. Next, I'm going to start dealing with my blaster. I want to have sound when I'm actually shooting or when my gun run out of ammo. So I'm going to enter back edit mode and I'm going to select the gun this time. Here, I'm going to push M to put the 3D cursor at its location. And I'm going to go under Object, Add to Render Layer in another positional sound source here. With my new sound source created, I'm going to hold Shift and select the gun. And I'm going to go under Object and Attach to Active. With my sound selected, Properties and Object, and I'm going to call it Sound Blaster here. Then we are going to move on to the blaster sound source properties. And for this specific case, what I'm going to do is I am going to run the sound in a loop in the background. And only when the player or non-player character is actually shooting, I'm going to increase the gain and then progressively put it back to 0. So that is going to give us the effect that we want. So what we're going to do, we are going to set that the sound source is going to be autoplay and auto loop. So as soon as we're going to hit the play button, the start button is going to start by default and the gain will be set to 0. So when we press to fire, then the gain was going to crank up and then go back down. We are going to assign a sound buffer, which is going to be by default, let's say our blaster. I'm going to stop it now. Stop it manually here. Stop making it loop. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to start adding the code that is going to allow me to shoot and trigger that sound. But before that, I'm going to change also its reference distance and max distance, 0.25 and 100. And now I'm going to jump in the bot controller code and I'm going to declare at the top of the file to actually grab the actual sound buffer asset here, because I'm going to need to change them based on if I still have ammo or no ammo. So what I do is I'm going to store the blaster H and the blaster H empty. I am going to use the library get sound buffer function, and then I'm simply going to pass here in parameter the full path. If I double click and simply Control A, Control C, this is the full path of my sound buffer here. So this is the way I'm going to initialize them, and then I'm going to reuse them below. I am going to now jump to the code of our bot controller where I am actually shooting, and I am going to declare that I am going to get the attachment, the first attachment, the attachment at index 0 of my gun. And I am going to access is data sound source. So now I have the sound source properties here that are accessible from my sound blaster. Now I'm only interested in triggering that sound when I'm actually shooting. And what I'm going to do I am going to paste this block of code here when I am actually shooting in this location here, right below, right before I am actually taking down the ammo, right before I'm taking down the ammo actually, here. If my ammo is at this point greater than 0, and I'm going to check the actual sound buffer that is connected to my sound blaster. So if my sound buffer asset unique ID is different than the blaster asset unique ID, the blaster is the one that we have here, our sound buffer. We are going to, it means that we were on the empty one, so we are going to reset back to the blaster. And we are going to increase the gain, set it to 3. Next, what we're going to do is, if we are entering the opposite condition, we do not have no more ammo. So we are going to do a check to ensure that the sound buffer asset unique ID is, if it is different than our blaster empty asset unique ID, then we're going to restore back the blaster empty. So as long as we got ammo, if the previous sound buffer that was connected is the empty one, we're going to set back the blaster. And if we run out of ammo, if we had the blaster sound buffer connected, we are going to connect the sound blaster empty. Then for this one, as you can see, we are simply increasing the gain. And when it run out of ammo, we want to have more of a click motion that is going to happen every 100 milliseconds every time we try to shoot. So here we are basically letting the sound run over and over. And when it becomes empty, we are going to stop the sound from playing and then replay it back. So we're going to have a click motion that is happening every 100 milliseconds. And we are going to set the gain to be slightly less, about half actually, of when we are shooting with a full gun. And we're going to set that to 1.5. Last thing we need to do is actually to interpolate back the value of our gain to 0 every time we are updating. So here we got our blaster that is declared, and we're going to go all the way down here. And just before we are exiting the function, we are going to subtract the application delta time multiplied by 10 to our current gain and ensure that our gain are not going to go below 0. I am going to build and save this. I'm going to select my viewport and push spacebar. And as I move around and start shooting, I should first activate the sound here since I'm simulating it here. So I'm going to go under my sound source property and play. And I am having the blaster sound selected here. I'm going to push play. So now it is running in the background, as you can see, since we're simulating. When we're going to later on push the start button, since we have autoplay that is on, it will start automatically. But now since we are in the viewport and edit mode, we need to trigger that manually by setting the state to play. And if I now try to shoot, I am now hearing my blaster sound. I am now going to access my bot and make it run out of ammo. So I'm going to go under properties object, hold shift and scroll with right mouse click all the way down. And I am going to put it somewhere here. And now our ammo, we have no more ammo and we can hear the blaster empty sound. If I restore it back, shoot again, we have ammo and then no ammo. So we can see that our code here is actually working properly. I am now going to implement the sound for our footsteps. When the robot is moving around, I want to have some sort of feedback when his feet are actually touching the ground here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to enter back edit mode, shift and 1. And this time I'm going to, with my bot selected, I'm going to push dot to access it. And now since I remove it from that render layer, I'm temporarily going to put it back, reset that the ammo back to 0. And I'm going to go under render layers, under relation, and I'm going to click on geometry so at least I can see it. So I am going to push M to put the 3D cursor at the pivot point of my bot around his feet. And I'm going to create a new sound source, add to render layer, another new positional sound source, and I'm going to simply repeat the exact same process that I did for the other. with my new sound source selected, I am going to first start and rename it sound and footsteps here. And I'm going to hold shift and select my bot, and I'm going to create a relationship. So I'm going to click on add to attach to active. And now the sound source will follow wherever my bot is going, and it will be located at his foot. And now I'm going to also reset. It is already reset. So I wanted to ensure that it is at 0, 0. So since I used the 3D cursor, that is avoiding me doing this manually. So now I'm going to access my footsteps property. And for the footsteps, we're going to basically repeat the same process as we did with the blaster that is firing live ammo. We're going to make this sound play in the background and simply increase the gain when our bot is moving. So we are going to go under the sound source property of our footsteps, and I am going to crank back the gain to 0. We're going to manually do it in code. I am also going to set it to autoplay and auto loops, the same way I did with the blaster. And for the sound buffer, I'm going to drag and drop my footsteps here and trigger it. Okay. So like that, it is activated. I am going to change the referral distance to be 0.25 and the max distance to be 100. And now I am ready to, I'm going to still loop it now here, and I'm going to start it actually. So like that, right now the gain is at 0. I'm going to do it in code so like that we can have direct feedback right away. So I'm going to jump in my code back in my bot controller, and this is going to be pretty straightforward. I need to access the code where I am actually moving the robot, which is here when I'm modifying the linear velocity. So the code will be very straightforward. Get the attachment using the helper function that we created earlier. Get the attachment of the bot that match the name steps, since we have call it sound footsteps. Steps will trigger it. And we have now sounds footsteps and access its data sound source. Now for the gain, we are going to set that if the physic object friction is equal to 0, which we are setting here, it means that we are on the move. Set the gain of the footstep to 2, and if it is not 0, if the friction is not 0, set back the gain to 0. So with that said, we can go inside our world and try that right away. Let's build and save, and push spacebar with the viewport selected, and let's move around a bit. And we can hear our footstep kicking in, and we can see here that the gain is cranking up and down. The only problem that we're having is it is not really synchronized with the actual robot movement. So what we're going to do, we're going to low down the pitch and put it somewhere like 0.8. And like that, the sound of our footstep seems to match better the actual footsteps of our robot. Go back to our robot here and make sure that it is not part of the geometry render layer. We only use it temporarily. And next, we're going to leave it there. We are going to now deal with the deactivated sound. So I'm going to also attach that to our robot. So we're going to go back, push spacebar to enter back edit mode. And this time I am going to attach the deactivated sound somewhere here around the spine. I'm going to push M to place it to this location. And then I'm going to create a new object. So to handle the sound when our bot get hit in space. So add to render layer, sound source and positional again. And with position, my newly created positional sound source, hold shift, select the robot and ensure that the spine is selected, object attached to active. And I'm going to confirm that this new sound have been attached to the spine. So I'm going to access the properties object, and I'm going to rename it at the same time to be sound deactivated right here. And I'm going to hold shift and scroll down and ensure that I am at the root bone of my relation is actually the spine. Next, I am going to access the sound source properties for this one. I am going to just trigger a sound the same way we did with the crate here. And every time the player get hit, this sound will stop and play back, stop and play back. So what we're going to do, we are going to set the sound buffer for deactivated here. And we are going to change also the reference distance 0.25 and 100, just as we did for all the sound, which give us good values for now. Next, we are going to go in our code, and we are now going to use the following when our bot get actually hit right here. So what we're going to do, we are going to paste this here, and we are going to declare a new variable for our target bot. And since we're using it here, we are duplicating code. We're simply going to copy this and paste it here. So our target bot is our target first attachment, and we want to access the deactivated sound. We're going to use the helper get attachment with our target bot to grab the data sound source. And now I only want I am going to move this code slightly below, and I only want to run this sound if the health is actually greater than 0. If our robot is already dead, I do not want to play any sound. So I am going to grab my deactivated sound, and every time the robot gets hit, I am going to stop and play it back. I'm going to build and save that, and later on we're going to be able to test this code properly. And next, I am going to deal with my sound background music. So I am going to push 1 with the viewport selected to go from top view. And I'm going to place my ambient sound to be somewhere outside of the level. I usually like to do that. It's just probably more clear. Double click to place the 3D cursor. And this time I'm going to go under object, add to render layer, sound source, and this time is going to be ambient. So I am going to rename my object and call it background underscore music. And I'm going to access its properties. I'm going to assign the in a heartbeat sound buffer. Oh, no. Since it's a relatively long sound file, I am going to enable streaming for that one. Instead, the memory is going to be hitting the roof. So I'm going to enable streaming and drag and drop the sound buffer here. And so now we are using only 32K with 4 buffer that will be queued and then played back one after the other. So we are good with that. The only thing we need to do now is to enable autoplay and auto loop for this specific sound. So when we're hitting the start button later on, it will start playing automatically. And also, I don't want the gain of that background music to be cranked up at the top. I really want to have it in background. So I'm going to set something like 0.1 just to ensure that it is there, but not too loud. And we are going to add another line here. As I realized while testing those sound source before recording the session, I realized that the robot is actually able to hit himself when we are over these hill over there and jumping. As the physic thread is trying to catch up with our renderer, it might happen that we accidentally shoot ourselves. So what we want to do is add another condition here. If the string find using string find for the target name, its bot controller is different than nil, it means that we're hitting a robot. We're going to add another condition to that, and we want to make sure that the target that we are aiming at is not the controller which is the one that call our bot controller function. So we want to make sure that the target name is different than our controller name. Like that, we're going to avoid shooting ourselves. So I'm going to build and save, and we are now ready to move on to the next step.